The Sociology of Freedom. Manifesto of the Democratic Civilization. Volume 3. Written by Abdullah Öcalan. Social problems. The problem of power and the state. I am frequently compelled to emphasize that just as history is the present, any component of the present is also history. The very first thing each new emerging civilization does is to make sure that history and the present are disconnected, using propaganda that aims to ensure its legitimacy and to present it as past eternity and post-eternity. In the real life of a society, there is no such disconnection. Furthermore, without a universal history, no local or singular history would make sense. Therefore, the problem of power and the state, which has existed since they first appeared, is also with a slight difference, a problem at present. These differences result from temporal and spatial changes. When we look at the concepts of differentness and transformation in this way, we increase the degree of accuracy of our interpretations. We also need to consider the drawbacks of underestimating differentness, transformation, and development, or of regarding them as trivial. Just as our thinking atrophies if it is not based on universal history, evaluating historical development without considering differentness and transformation and treating it as nothing more than repetition obscures the truth to a similar degree. It is quite important not to fall into either of these forms of reductionism. Our first finding related to power and the state is that they have increased their capacity both over and within society. Until the 16th century, domination was primarily built outside of society and was both glamorous and intimidating. Civilization has taken numerous such striking forms through the ages. The state, as the official expression of power, had drawn firm lines, hoping that the sharper the distinction between the state and society, the more it would benefit. In terms of power, these lines were quite explicit as an intra-society phenomenon. The lines separating women from men, youth from elderly, members of the ashiret from the head of the ashiret, faithful lay people from the representatives of religions and denominations, were determined in keeping with clear rules and customs. From tone of voice to the way of walking and sitting, the authority of power, of dominating and being dominated, was firmly established with detailed rules. It is perfectly clear that to make power and the state tangible and present, as they were still the minority, required that their authority be established in this way. These rules served as tools of legitimacy and indoctrination. The reason for the radical transformation of the authority of power and the state in European civilization was the need felt to more quickly infiltrate every nook and cranny of society. Two fundamental factors arguably played a role in the vertical and horizontal expansion of power. The first was the enlargement of the masses to be exploited. Without a corresponding expansion of the administration, exploitation would not have been feasible. Just as a growing herd requires numerous shepherds, the growing population required substantial growth in state bureaucracy. We must also consider the need for rulers to internally suppress society as a corollary of the massive growth of their external defense forces. Wars have always created bureaucracy. The army itself is among the largest of bureaucratic organizations. The second factor was the increasing consciousness and resistance in society. The fact that European society had not experienced profound exploitation and had continuously resisted it meant that extensive power and a large state were essential. In Europe, the struggle of the bourgeois against the aristocracy and that of the working class against both of them necessitated the construction of far-reaching power and a pervasive state. Perhaps the fact that for the first time, the bourgeoisie, in the form of the middle class, constituted the state made for a new kind of power and state. This bloc, arising within society and becoming the state, with the inevitable increase in power, found itself compelled to organize within society. The bourgeois is such a huge class that it could not simply dominate power and state from the outside. As this class became the state, it inevitably found itself enmeshed in internal social strife. The notion of class conflict makes this clear. Liberalism, a bourgeois ideology, beats around the bush looking for a solution to this problem. But what has, in fact, happened so far is further growth of power and the state, and a cancerous bureaucratization. The more power and the state grow within the society, the more civil strife there is. This has been the fundamental problem within European society from the outset. The great constitutional, democratic, republican, and anarchist struggles are closely related to the way power and the state are structured. Our current preferred remedy is a fundamental human right tied to strict constitutional rules, the rule of law, and democracy. Instead of a permanent solution, the state and society are coerced to find a compromise around power and leave behind the great stormy past. As such, the problem of power and the state has not been resolved, but has been removed to a level where it is sustainable. If we look closely, we can see that the intertwinement of society, power, and the state has been developed using nationalism, sexism, religionism, and various scientisms, whereby, to sustain the nation-state, everyone is drawn into a paradigm where everyone is both power and society, and the state and society. In this way, it is assumed that the bourgeois nation-state solution will be found by suppressing the internal class struggle and by the defensive position always remaining in place in the exterior. This is one of the main methods used worldwide to suppress the problem rather than resolve it. The fascist quality of the nation-state as the maximum power and state could be seen most clearly in German fascism. The first example of the nation-state arose during the resistance of Netherlands and England to the Spanish Empire. The nation-state legitimized its rule by mobilizing the entire society against an external power that it called the enemy. Initially, the development of national society in Europe had relatively positive elements, but it was clear that this development, even at its birth, acted to conceal class exploitation and oppression. The nation-state definitely bears the mark of the bourgeoisie. It is this class's state model. Later, Napoleon's military expeditions strengthened this model in France and spread it across Europe. The German and Italian bourgeoisie were underdeveloped and had difficulty in creating national unity, which led them to adopt more nationalistic policies. The bourgeoisie was compelled to embrace a chauvinist nationalist state model because of the external threat of occupation, as well as the continuing internal resistance of the aristocracy and the working class. Defeat and crisis. These are the two things that brought many countries, especially Germany and Italy, at a crossroads, either a social revolution or fascism, with the fascist state model prevailing in this dilemma. While Hitler, Mussolini, and their like were defeated, their systems were victorious. The nation-state can essentially be described as society being identified with the state and the state with society, which also constitutes the definition of fascism. Naturally, the state can no more become communal than society can become the state. Only totalitarian ideologies can assert such a claim. The fascist character of such claims is obvious. Fascism, as a form of state, always has the seat of honor at the bourgeois liberal table. It is the form of rule in times of crisis. Since crisis is structural, so is the regime, called the nation-state regime. It is the apex of the crisis of financial capital era. Capitalist monopolies state, which has currently peaked globally, is also generally fascist during its most reactionary and despotic period. Although there is much talk of the collapse of the nation-state, claiming that democracy will be constructed in its place is simply credulousness. It may be that both macro-global and micro-local fascist formations are on the agenda. Developments in the Middle East, the Balkans, Central Asia, and the Caucasus are noteworthy. South America and Africa are on the eve of new experiences. Europe seeks to distance itself from nation-state fascism with reform. It is unclear what will happen to Russia and China. The US, the superhegemon, is in an exchange with every form of the state. Clearly, the problem of power in the state is in one of its worst phases. The dilemma of either a democratic revolution or fascism is on the agenda and is still vital. The system's regional and central UN organizations are no longer functional. Financial capital, which peaked during the most global phase of civilization, is the section of capital that most fuels the crisis. The political and military component of the financial capital monopoly is the intensive war on society. This is what is being experienced on many fronts around the world. Determining what political and economic formations might arise from the world system structural crisis requires intellectual, political, and moral work, not prophecy. During the financial capital era, the pinnacle of the virtual capital monopoly of capitalist modernity, society is at risk of disintegrating as never before in history. The political and moral fabric of society has been smashed, leading to a social phenomena that even goes beyond genocide, society-cide. Virtual capital's domination of the media provides it with a weapon for executing a society-cide worse than that of World War II. Up against the canons of nationalism, religionism, sexism, scientism, and artism, sports, soap operas, etc., with which the society is being battered 24 hours a day by the media, how can the society be defended? Media are effective in society like a second analytical intelligence. Just as analytical intelligence is neither good nor bad in and of itself, media too is a neutral tool. Just as with any weapon, whoever is using it determines the role it plays. Just as hegemonic powers always possess the most effective weapons in the literal sense, they also have the dominant control over the media as a weapon. Because they use media as a second analytical intelligence, they can very effectively neutralize society's power to resist. With this weapon, they are building a virtual society. Virtual society is another form of society-side. You could also consider the nation-state as a form of society-side. In both cases, society is prevented from being itself and transformed into a tool of the controlling monopoly. Just as it is very dangerous to treat social nature simplistically, preventing it from being itself exposes it to unclear dangers. The age of the virtual monopoly, the financial capital age, is only possible in a society that has ceased to be itself. Thus, it is no coincidence that both appeared during the same period, since they are linked. The society that the nation-state has deprived from being itself and that the media has seduced is a totally defeated society. From the rubble of societies like this, the hegemonic powers are building something new. There can be no doubt that this is the social age in which we find ourselves. We are not only living in the most problematic societies to date, but in societies that offer nothing to individuals. Our societies have not only lost their moral and political fabric, their very existence is under threat. Our societies are not just experiencing some random problem, they face the threat of destruction. If the problems of our age continue to grow and become more profound and cancerous, despite the effectiveness of science, society-side is not just a hypothesis, it is a real danger. The claim that the rule of the nation-state protects society creates a huge illusion and only makes this danger gradually come true. Society is not only facing problems, but its own destruction. Society's moral and political problem. I'm aware of the dangers that result from partitioning the social problem into individual problems. This methodological approach, developed by Eurocentric science, using analytical reason, unconditionally may seem to have led to some achievements, but the danger of losing the totality of truth cannot be underestimated. I will nonetheless use this methodology, always bearing in mind its flaws and the risk that comes with treating a singular social problem as if it were a series of discrete problems. And in the epistemology section, I will discuss other approaches. There is a reason for power and the state to be the first social problems addressed, not least because they are the main source of all social problems. The power and state relations and apparatuses, which, with all their gravity, initially became effective over the society, and since the 16th century within society, essentially function to prepare a weakened society, deprived of its ability to defend itself, for monopoly exploitation. This makes it important to define the role of power and the state correctly. Describing power and the state as no more than the totality of the apparatuses and relations of coercion is seriously inadequate. I believe that the most important role played by these apparatuses is to leave society weak and deprive it of its ability to defend itself by ensuring that society's moral and political fabric, that is, its very means of existence, is continuously weakened until it can no longer play its role. Society cannot maintain its existence if it cannot form the key areas of morality and politics. The fundamental role of morality is to equip society with the rules necessary to continue existing and provide the capacity to implement them. Any society that loses the rules governing its existence and the ability to implement them becomes nothing but a herd of animals, and can then be easily abused and exploited. The role of politics, on the other hand, is to provide society with the necessary and moral rules, and through a process of continuous discussion, to decide on the means and methods needed to meet society's fundamental material and intellectual needs. Social politics leads to a more lively and open-minded society by continuously developing discussion and the decision-making skills necessary to meet these needs. This constitutes society's most essential area of existence. giving it the ability to govern itself and handle its own affairs. A society without politics will slip and slide from one extreme to another, running around like a chicken with its head cut off before its death. The most effective way to leave a society dysfunctional and weak is to deprive it of politics, including its capacity to develop politics. The Islamic term is Sharia. An imperative factor for the discussion and decision-making necessary for existence and for meeting the fundamental material and immaterial needs. Nothing could be worse for society. This is why, historically, power and the state apparatuses and relations have always instituted law in place of social morality and imposed state administration in place of social politics at the first opportunity. The fundamental duty of power and the state is to prevent society from using its moral and political power, the two fundamental strategies for its existence, and to replace them with law and rulers at all times. This is necessary to ensure the accumulation of capital and the monopoly of exploitation. Every page of the 5,000-year-old history of civilization overflows with examples of how to break society's moral and political capacity and replace it with law and administration by the capital monopolies. This is the history of civilization at its bluntest and with its true motives, and if it is to be meaningful, it must be written correctly from this point of view. This is the truth, hidden at the heart of every social conflict throughout history. Will society live by its own morality and politics, or be turned into a herd, subjugated to law and to the administration imposed by unrestrained exploitative monopolies? When I say the main source of problems is the unreasonable cancerous growth of power and state law administration, that is what I mean. It may be beneficial to elaborate on another issue. When hierarchy is established for the first time, and experience and expertise become important for the benefit of society, whether we call them state or authority, we expect them to be beneficial. The fact that society has not regarded the state and authority or power as entirely negative is presumably due to these expected benefits. Society expects experience and expertise from the state and authority, believing this will facilitate its affairs. These two factors are the reasons why society puts up with the continued existence of the state. Not everyone has the necessary experience or an area of expertise. Throughout history, the state and authority have taken advantage of this legitimate expectation to staff its administration with people who are the most clumsy, inexperienced, and lacking in expertise. As a result, administration became an arena of scheming, rather than one that implemented the law, for dawdling instead of providing work based on expertise. The terrible degeneration and disasters we are witnessing are closely linked to this huge distortion and diversion. The bourgeoisie, an expression of the cancerous development of the middle class, has historically placed itself at the center of society, at its core, and presented its most selfish interests as law, and its most degenerate methods as constitutional administration. And to do so, it has multiplied power and the state, divided into an unlimited number of apparatuses and so-called areas of expertise. This has been a total disaster. Society jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. The far-reaching liberal perspective that developed, the bourgeois refined reason, on topics such as the republic, democracy, downsizing the administration, and restrictions on power and the state, not only conceals the truth, but is imbued with contradictions. The bourgeois middle class no longer has the ability that it had in antiquity to downsize the administration and restrict power and the state by developing a constitution, a republic, and a democracy. It is the material structure of the middle class and its way of existence that render these noble concepts dysfunctional. If the society could not sustain a king or a dynasty in antiquity, how is it supposed to sustain the burden of an unlimited bourgeois apparatus and the accompanying bourgeois family and dynasty? I intentionally use the term bourgeois family and dynasty because they both stem from the same source. The bourgeoisie got its art of administration and rule from the nobility and monarchy that preceded it. It has no capacity for self-creation. The cancerous effect of power and state relations on society stems from the class nature of the middle class, which is imbued with fascism. Consequently, one of the most fundamental problems is that the bourgeoisie cripples and renders society's moral and political fabric dysfunctional. Obviously, the moral and political fabric of society cannot be completely eliminated. As long as society exists, so shall morality and politics. But because power and the state are no longer areas of expertise and experience, morality and politics can no longer fulfill their creative and functional capacity. It is crystal clear that nowadays, power and the state apparatus and relations, such as media, intelligence services, and specialized operational units, ideological teachings, etc., have infiltrated every nook and cranny of society, stifling it. Society has fallen so far that it no longer recognizes itself and can no longer implement any of its moral principles, engage in any political discussion about its most basic needs, or make any decisions, the essence of democratic politics. In addition, the fact that global corporations, the past eternity and post-eternity monopolies, the much discussed and true ruling powers of our times, have experienced the greatest capital boom in history in this era, is closely linked to the fact that society has been put in this position. Without the decay and fragmentation of society, it would not be possible to earn money from money by virtual means, which is to say, without involving in any way the means of production. The profits made by the monopolies throughout history and today's exorbitant profits made without working, as if money grew on trees, are attained by extracting from society's existence and brain power, because, in fact, money does not grow on trees. I must emphasize that it is not only the unlimited expansion of power and the state apparatus and relations that puts society in this position. The media is the other key effective source of hegemony, facilitating the ideological conquest of the society. Society cannot be brought down by the imposition of power and the state apparatus and relations alone. It needs to be stupefied with distractions like nationalism, religionism, scientism, and the industrialization of arts and sports in particular. In the absence of virtual global corporations, that is, financial capital or money capital, the historical monopolies would be unable to prevent society from being itself and to subject it to unlimited exploitation to the point of society-side. Society's mentality problem. As we've established, one of the primary conditions for opening up a society to exploitation is to deprive it of morality and politics, which requires the collapse of society's mentality, the intellectual basis of society's moral and political fabric. This is why, throughout history, the rulers and the exploitative monopolies have first and foremost constructed hegemony over mentality to attain their goals. For example, the way the Sumerian priests first built the temple ziggurat to increase the productivity of Sumerian society. That is, opened it up to exploitation. It is quite important to bear in mind the function of the Sumerian temple, as this is the oldest known example of distorting and conquering the social mindset. I have emphasized that social nature is formed by the most flexible mental structures. If we do not truly apprehend that society is the most intelligent nature, we cannot develop a meaningful sociology. Therefore, tyrants, rulers, and the crafty make it their fundamental duty to undermine society's intelligence and capacity to think, making the original monopoly the monopoly of mentality, or the temple. This original temple had two functions. First, it was a tool for intellectual domination, a hegemonic tool of the utmost importance. Second, it was the best tool for severing society from its essential intellectual values. The concept of society's own mentality needs to be well understood. When a human being first picked up the stone and stick, it was the result of thought. What we have here is not instinct, but the first seeds of analytical thought. As experience was accumulated, society developed, which, in essence, was the result of this concentration of thought. The more experience a society gained, and the more focused this thought became, the more ability and strength it gained, with the result that it was better able to feed, defend, and reproduce itself. This process clarifies for us what social development is and why it is so important. Once society constantly makes itself think, its moral tradition, common sense or conscience, that is its collective thought, begins to take shape. Morality is the greatest treasure of a society, and therein lies its central importance. It is the fundamental organ for accumulating experience and the reason a society survives, sustaining and further developing its life. Because of its experience, any society understands full well that if it loses its moral base, it will crumble. To a certain degree, every society has a sharp, deep-seated instinct about the centrality of morality for its survival. In the old clan and tribal societies, the punishment for not abiding by moral rules was death, or being banished from society and left to die. Honor crimes, which still continue in the most distorted ways, are rooted in these moral rules. While morality represents the tradition of collective thought, the function of politics is a little different. Discussing and making decisions about daily collective affairs requires a power of thought. Politics is necessary to daily creative thinking. Society knows very well that without morality, the source and accumulated thought, there can be neither political thought nor practical politics. Politics is an indispensable area of action for daily collective affairs, serving society's common good. When there are differences of opinion, or even objectionable ideas, discussion is the key to making decisions about society's affairs. A society that lacks politics either adheres herd-like to rules imposed by others, or loses all sense of direction, as in the example of the chicken with its head cut off. The power of thought is not a superstructural institution. It is society's brain, with morality and politics as its organs. Society's other organ is, of course, the temple as a sacred site. This temple is not the temple of hegemonic power, of hierarchy and state, but society's own sacred site. Society's sacred site has a place of honor in archaeological discoveries. It is perhaps the most important structure that has survived into the present. This isn't incidental. Society's first sacred site is the location of its past, its ancestry, its identity, and what is common to them. It is the site of collective remembrance and worship. It is the place of self-remembering, a sign of creating something rich for the future, and an important reason for being together. Society was aware that if the temple was built in a place that was remarkable, splendid, and worth living in, then it would be better able to symbolize society and would have greater value. For this reason, splendor was displayed most at temples. The temple, as can be seen from the Sumerian example, was also the laborers' living quarters and the storage site of means of production, which is to say, it was the locus of collective work. It was not only a place of worship, but also of collective discussion and decision-making. It was a political center, the home of craftspeople, the site of inventions. It was where architects and scholars tested their skills. It was the first example of an academy. Not surprisingly, temples in ancient times were also centers of prophecy. All these factors and many more are what make the temple important. It would be entirely reasonable to call this institution the ideological core of society's mentality. The megaliths found amid the ruins in Urfa are 12,000 years old. When this temple was constructed, the agricultural revolution had not yet occurred, but it is clear that the stone carvings and the erection of T-shaped stone pillars required advanced skills, and thus an advanced society. Who were they? How did they talk, feed themselves, and reproduce? How did they think? What were their customs? How did they provide for themselves? We do not yet have answers to these questions. The only traces that remain are the megaliths and what are most likely the ruins of a temple. Since ordinary peasants today would not be able to carve and erect stone pillars like these, the people who did this and their society were clearly no more backward than today's peasants and village communities. We can only make assumptions about such issues. Although distorted, the sacred nature of Urfa may be like a flowing river, filtered through a tradition that predates written history. This is why I am not discussing the existence and importance of the social temple, but the hegemonic temple's existence and its key function. Egyptian priests played at least as big a role as Sumerian priests in the formation of the hegemonic temples, and Indian Brahmins didn't lag behind the Egyptian priests. The temples of the Far East were in no way inferior to the Sumerian and Egyptian temples. South American temples also played a hegemonic role. The youth were not sacrificed in these temples on a whim. The dominant temples of all the eras of civilization served hegemony, like copies of the original. The main function of these centers was to prepare society to serve the rulers. The military wing of the monopoly sowed terror by severing opponents' heads and using their skulls to build castles and ramparts, while the spiritual wing completed the job by conquering minds, and both served important roles in enslaving communities. One generated fear, while the other convinced. Who can deny the continuity of this aspect of civilized society, stretching back thousands of years? European hegemonic civilization changed its form in this respect dramatically, but it preserved its essence. This change was not sufficient for the gigantic nation-state apparatuses that encompassed society. So they took steps to make society, whose very core they penetrated, dependent on them. What the centers for forming mentality, such as universities, academies, colleges, high schools, primary schools, and preschools, begin, the churches, synagogues, and mosques complement, and the military barracks refine. Is this anything short of the conquest, occupation, and assimilation of the remains of society's mindset, its moral and political fabric? When certain esteemed commentators claim that turning society into the multitudes amounts to turning the people into herds, they are not, in fact, talking nonsense. Furthermore, the memory of how such a colonization of the mind leads to fascist society is still fresh. The bloodbath of our recent past, too, is the outcome of this conquest of mentality. It doesn't hurt to repeat that if you are the one waving the icons of nationalism, religionism, sexism, sportism, and artism, you move society, or rather the herd, toward your desired target. The conquest of the mind is what opened society to the current dominant global financial capital. No use of force would have been as effective. Yet again, we should salute the Sumerian priests and the temples they invented. You were such great conquerors that 5,000 years later, your current representatives in today's temples can generate the largest accumulation of capital in history without lifting a finger. Even the most powerful images of gods and their shadows could not yield as much profit. Therefore, the continuous and cumulative accumulation of capital is not an empty concept. Distorting the intellect is not a simple operation. Dr. Hikmet Kıvılcımlı and the Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci defined hegemonic conquest similarly while they were in prison during the nation-state's glory days. What both Gramsci and Kıvılcımlı knew was based on their experiences. I, too, at the end of the day, am a prisoner of global capital. Failure to recognize it correctly in my own mind would be a betrayal of the very mind of society. Society's economic problem. When there is a talk of economic problems, I always think of ant colonies. If small creatures like ants have no economic problems, since economy for each living being is about food, then how can creatures like human beings, with such advanced reason and experience, have serious economic problems, or such an embarrassing situation as unemployment? Is there anything in nature that human beings with their intelligence cannot turn into work? The problem definitely has nothing to do with the natural function of things or the environment. The errant wolf of humanity lies within it. All economic problems, foremost unemployment, are linked to capitalization of society. No doubt, Marx's analysis of capital is valuable. He tries to explain unemployment during periods of crisis. But sadly, the disease of positivism caught him in a very bad way, and the disease of scientism prevented him from a more profound analysis of historical society. What I'm trying to do is to show that capital is not the economy. On the contrary, it is the most effective tool for undermining the economy. I say this primarily because profit and capital have never been the goal of society's development, and thus never had a place within society as such. A rich and prosperous society is conceivable. Morality and politics leave room for this. But when society suffers from need and unemployment, focusing on wealth and capital goes beyond being a crime. It is associated with society-side. We see civilization as an entanglement of problems because it rests on the monopoly of capital. When Rosa Luxemburg connected capital accumulation to the existence of a non-capitalist society, she was wandering at the edge of a very important truth. Had she walked right in, she would have concluded that capital accumulation is not simply dependent upon the existence of a non-capitalist society. This accumulation is also made possible through seizure of society's values by blood-sucking ticks. She would have seen that the worker has become an accomplice, drinking a drop of the blood that is his share. Let me be clear, I do not deny the worker's labor, but the formation of capital is only dependent on the worker's labor to a very small extent. And when considered philosophically, historically, and socially, this small extent also loses its meaning. Current ecological problems make it increasingly clear that industrialism is a tool for usury at the expense of society and the environment. No person with knowledge and understanding can deny that business managers and skilled laborers have become society's most privileged strata, with an equivalent snowballing growth of unemployment as its counterpart. The advanced industrial strata, the monopolistic commercial and financial strata, that is, capital monopolies with their multi-stakeholder partnerships, have further rendered the concept of worker meaningless. It is important to acknowledge that the worker has been reduced to a belt that ties society to the monopoly of capital. Just as real socialism, or state capitalism, is a system that rests on the concessionist workers, classic private capitalism also has its concessionist workers. They have always existed in society side by side. The remaining society, the non-capitalist society, is what Rosa Luxemburg was thinking about. What we are discussing here, if one notices, is a distinction made between capitalist and non-capitalist. For Luxemburg, both are forms of society. I, however, see it differently. I see capitalism not as a form of society, but as an extensive network, an organization that has established itself above society and extorts surplus value, drains the economy, generates unemployment, amalgamates with power and the state, and uses the powerful tools of ideological hegemony. Recently, the concessionist workers have become a part of this organization. I hope to dispense with a number of misunderstandings by defining the essence of the monopolistic network. Above all, I hope to uncover the trap implicit with the concept of capitalist society. Defining capitalist monopoly as a society is excessively gracious. Capital might form networks and organizational networks. Indeed, even the mafia must be seen as a gainful network of capital. The only reason that the network of capital is not called the mafia is because of its hegemonic power over society and its relations with the official power. Otherwise, it too would have remained nothing but a network, lacking even the ethics of the mafia. I must add that I do not consider the medium-sized industrialists, merchants, or farmers capitalists. They are social strata that, for the most part, try to produce to meet genuine economic needs, even if they are being squeezed by capital from every direction. In addition, I do not consider exchange of small goods at the market capitalism, or those who produce these goods at their small shops capitalists. Obviously, various professions cannot be considered capitalist. All workers who are not concessionist, peasants, students, civil servants, craftspeople, children and women, form the backbone of society. I aim to develop a definition of non-capitalist society. When I speak of non-capitalist society, Unlike most Marxists, I don't mean a society that is defined as feudal, or one in which the Asiatic mode of production prevails, or one that is semi-feudal. I'm convinced that these concepts conceal rather than reveal the truth. Furthermore, my analysis not only addresses the capital networks that were centralized in Europe after 16th century, but all of the capital networks, commercial, political, military, ideological, agricultural, and industrial monopolies, that have extorted surplus value throughout history. It doesn't take a lot of study to see that present-day global financial capital verifies this analysis in striking ways. It is essential that the anti-capital character of social nature is recognized. Throughout its millennia-long march, society has always been aware of the highly corrupting nature of capital accumulation. For example, almost every religion has condemned usury, one of the most effective methods of capital accumulation. It is not enough to say that capital is currently developing a massive growth of unemployment to create cheap and flexible labor force. While this is partially true, the main reason is that capital constrains society to profit-oriented activities. However, activity for the sake of profit and capital does not meet society's fundamental needs. If the production to feed the population does not create profit, then even if society wallows in poverty and starves to death, indeed millions of people are currently living and dying in just such conditions, capital will not budge. If a small portion of the capital available was invested in agriculture, the problem of hunger would be eliminated. But instead, capital is continuously dismantling and destroying agriculture because the profit ratio in agriculture is negligible to nil. As long as capitalists can earn huge sums of money from money, they will never think of agriculture. Such thinking would be meaningless to capital. In the past, the state as a monopoly considerably subsidized agricultural producers, receiving produce or money taxes in return. The present capital markets have rendered such state activities inconsequential. As a result, states that consider contributing to agriculture face bankruptcy. This means, therefore, the increasing unemployment and impoverishment of the main body of society is not the outcome of capital's temporary policies, but in fact stems from its structural characteristics. Even if people agree to work for the lowest possible wages, society's unemployment problem cannot be solved, as simple observation should make clear, even without further investigation. Let me say it one more time. We cannot free society from unemployment and poverty without abolishing policies and systems of maximum profit based on surplus value. For example, why is there such widespread unemployment, hunger, and poverty in the Mesopotamian meadows that mothered Neolithic society for 15,000 years and nourished numerous societies through the ages? With a non-profit production initiative, even by today's standards, these meadows could feed 25 million people. Thus, what these people and meadows need is not the hand of capital that prevents work, but for that hand, whether private or state, which is the sole reason for unemployment, hunger, and poverty, to leave them alone. The only thing needed is to link the land with the hand of the true laborer, which would require a revolution in society's mindset. This, in turn, would mean social morality and politics resuming their function as the fundamental structures or organs of society. For this to happen, democratic politics must rush to this task with all its heart, soul, and real brains. Society's industrialism problem. The Industrial Revolution, which was as important as the Agricultural Revolution, has carried on with ups and downs, experiencing a qualitative leap in the late 18th century and early 19th century, based on thousands of years of accumulation. It is impossible to guess where, when, and how it will stop or be stopped. This revolution has a characteristic akin to analytical reason. It is, in fact, the product of this reason, and it is under the absolute domination of capital. There is no doubt, however, that capital itself is not the creator of most industrial tools. However, capital has focused on turning them into profitable tools and taken possession of those it considers essential. Cheap mass production offers a major opportunity for the development of society. As with reason, industry that served society's needs would be valuable. The problem is not with industry itself, but with the way it is used. Industry is like the nuclear option. When it is used by the monopolies, it can be an unparalleled threat to life, portending both ecological disaster and war. Indeed, its use for making profit has become increasingly evident, accelerating environmental destruction. Industry is rapidly moving society toward virtual society. Humans are increasingly being replaced by robotics. If this continues, it will not be long before humans themselves are redundant. There is consensus that the current state of the environment not only threatens society, but all life on Earth. I must emphatically stress that holding industry solely responsible for this would be an aberration. On its own, industry is neutral. An industry in harmony with society's existence can play a decisive role in developing the world into a third nature, not only for humans, but for all life forms. It is possible, and if it were the case, we might even consider industry a blessing. But when industry is controlled by capital and is profit-driven, it can make the world hell for all of humanity, except a handful of monopolists. In fact, that seems pretty much to be our current situation. Humanity is undeniably extremely alarmed by the current course of events. The industrial monopoly has established genuine empires ruling over a society. For a single U.S. hegemon, there are tens of industrial hegemons. Even if political and military hegemons could be stopped, the industrial hegemons couldn't be easily halted because they are now global. If a country serving as the center begins to become precarious, then another location and/or country can be turned into the center. Who is to say that one of the U.S.'s industrial empires won't choose China as its center tomorrow? Why not, if the conditions are more suitable? We can see that this is gradually becoming an option. Industrialism shot agriculture in the heart. Agriculture, a necessity if human society is to exist, faces rampant destruction at the hands of industry. This sacred activity, which has nurtured humanity for the past 15,000 years, was left adrift, and preparations are now being made to turn it over to an industrial domination. Contrary to popular opinion, the involvement of profit and capital-driven industry in agriculture is not an opportunity for mass production. The industrial monopoly's use of genetically modified seeds is making the soil like a mother bearing a child by artificial insemination. Just as healthy pregnancy and maternity are not possible through all kinds of artificial intervention, it is also not healthy to inseminate the soil with genetically modified seeds. Industrial monopolies are preparing to engage in just such madness in relation to agriculture. Humanity will, as has even begun to, experience its worst counter-revolution in the agricultural area. The soil and agriculture are not just any mode of production or relationship. They are inseparable, existential aspects of society that cannot be tampered with. Human society is primarily built on the basis of the soil and agriculture. Detaching it from this space and production would be a huge blow to its existence. The cancerous growth of the cities has already begun to clearly exhibit this danger. Liberation would probably largely mean moving in the opposite direction, from city back to the soil and agriculture. I imagine the main slogan of this movement would be something like, either agriculture and soil for existence or extinction. The drive for profit and capital do not allow for industry to unite with the soil and agriculture and link them together by a friendly and symbiotic relationship, but instead piles up enormous contradictions and creates hostility between them. The class, ethnic, national, and ideological contradictions within society may lead to conflict and war, but they are not impossible to resolve. They are constructed by the human hand and they can be dismantled by the human hand. However, humans cannot keep the conflict between industry and the soil and agriculture under control, because industry is the tool of capital. The soil and agriculture arose ecologically over millions of years. If they degenerate, they cannot be reconstructed by the human hand. Just as manufacturing soil is impossible, agricultural products, or other living beings, including plants, are not likely to be created by humans at this point. This is not something we can expect. This potential has been fulfilled in the realization of the human being. It is neither meaningful nor possible to repeat what has already occurred. This is a profound philosophical issue, so I won't delve into it deeply here. However, just as the pharaohs tried unsuccessfully to prepare for the future with their pyramidic mausoleums, industrialism will also prove unable to create a future where life is worth living with its robotization. Its very approach is disrespectful to human beings. With so magnificent an entity as nature, how meaningful and important can robots or copies of the natural world possibly be? We are once again confronted with capital's mad drive for profit. Let us assume that robots offer the cheapest form of production. If there are no humans to use them, what good would they be? This aspect of industrialism is the main source of unemployment and is capital's major weapon against society's productivity. Capital uses industry as a weapon to manipulate the market, both by employing the fewest possible workers and by enforcing price cuts. Monopolistic prices cause crises of overproduction, the main factor behind unemployment. Rotting goods and millions of unemployed, starving, and poor people are the victims of these crises. Social nature can only be sustained by a tight connection with the environment, which is the product of millions of years and a favorable setting. No industrial creation can replace the environment, which is the fantastic creation of the universe. Land, air, sea, and space traffic have already reached disastrous levels. Industry constantly consumes fossil fuels, poisoning the environment and undermining the climate. The payoff for these disasters is a mere 200 years of profit accumulation. Is this accumulation worth all the destruction, which is far greater than the sum of the destruction rendered in all of history's wars, with the loss of lives greater than the sum total of lives previously lost to human violence, natural disasters, and all other causes? Industrialism, as a monopolistic ideology and tool, is one of society's fundamental problems. It should be deeply questioned, and the danger it gives rise to is sufficient reason to do so. If this monster continues to grow and gets out of control, it will make any examination and possible safeguards too little too late. If we are to prevent society from ceasing to be itself and becoming a virtual society, now is the time to take this monster from the hands of monopolies, first to make it harmless, and then to make it a friend of society. As we struggle against industrialism, there is a need to distinguish between monopoly's ideological approach to industrial technology and the way it is currently used, and a form of industrial technology that is in harmony with the general interests of society. This is the most important aspect of any scientific work done and of any ideological struggle. Groups that claim to struggle against industrialism as humanists, independent of social and class issues, cannot be expected to produce anything relevant. These groups cannot avoid coming into conflict with their own goals, and ultimately rendering a service to industrialism as a monopoly. Contrary to popular belief, industrialism has an ideological, militaristic, and class-based character, with science and technology as the material form of its ideology. In fact, it represents the most dangerous dimensions of existing science and technology. The industrial monster did not appear entirely of its own volition. Let's remember that when the English bourgeoisie embarked on its historical imperialist project on the island, on continental Europe, and around the world, it was this class that organized most quickly to make the most comprehensive possible use of industrialism. Later industrialism became a common weapon of the bourgeoisie in every country. This is evident, given that bourgeoisie domination around the world materialized at the point where industrial development, part of the triad of finance, trade, and industry, marked the 19th and 20th centuries. By declaring non-capitalist society reactionary and entering a strategic alliance with the industrial bourgeoisie, the real socialist movement unconsciously but completely contradicted its own goals, leading to a more tragic outcome than that experienced by any other movement that has objectively fallen into betrayal. One example would be Christianity, which was a religion of peace for 300 years, and then entered into an alliance with power and the state, leading it to objectively, and for the most part consciously, contradict and betray its own goals. The point is that Christianity also came into conflict with its initial goal, because it gravitated toward the monopoly of power, and as a result, could not escape becoming a civilization religion. In Islam, this happened while Muhammad was still alive. In the end, they all ultimately succumbed to the power industry. While today all of humanity is crying out against environmental destruction, as if the judgment day were near, it is important to understand the historical, social, and class dimensions of the devastation caused by industrialism in the light of similar movements, to take up the struggle against industrialism as a society's movement of existence, to inevitably wage a struggle in the style of a new sacred religious movement. Just as it is impossible to fight fire with fire, life lived in the swamp of industrialism must be questioned and abandoned if we are to wage an ecological struggle. If we do not wish to live new tragedies like those of Christianity, Islam, and real socialism, then we need to learn the lessons they offer and approach scientific, ideological, and moral political struggle correctly. Society's ecological problem. Clearly, the problem of industrialism is both part of the ecological problem and, its essential source. Thus, there is a risk of repetition as we assess this fundamental problem under a different heading. But the ecological problem makes more sense than the problem of industrialism because it is a social and problematic issue. Although the concept encompasses environmental science, it is essentially a scientific analysis of the tight relationship between social development and its environment. It basically became an issue of concern when environmental problems raised the alarm about rapidly approaching disaster. A branch of research arose as a result, although not entirely without undesirable implications. Because, like industrialism, the ecological problems were not created by society, but are the latest feat of the monopolies of the civilization. A comprehensive problem that encompasses history and is now number one on the agenda of the world and society. Perhaps no other problem has been either as severe or as important for revealing the true face of profit and capital systems and putting them on humanity's agenda as the ecological problem. The balance sheet of the civilization's system of profit and capital, the sum of all military, economic, commercial, and religious monopolies throughout history, is not only the disintegration of society in every respect, but also the far-reaching threat faced by all life forms and by the environment. What could prove more strikingly that monopolism is anti-society? Although human society's intelligence and flexibility mean that it is recognized as of the highest nature in comparison to all other living beings, in the final analysis, it too is a living entity. It is of this earth, the product of a very precisely regulated climatic environment and the evolution of the flora and fauna. Our world's atmosphere and climate, and the plant and animal world, are essential for human society as well, given that it constitutes the total sum of all. These words are highly sensitive and are closely connected. They are in essence a chain, and just as a chain ceases to work when one of its links is broken, when an important link in the evolutionary chain is broken, all of evolution is inevitably affected. Ecology is the science of these developments, and that's what makes it important. Humans can always re-regulate the internal order of society because social reality is a human creation. But the same is not true of the environment. If important environmental links are broken, as a result of the actions of some groups organized around the profit and capital monopoly, operating above the society from which it emerged, evolutionary disasters, in a chain-like reaction, might expose the environment and society to mass destruction. Let's remember that the environmental links are the result of millions of years of evolution. The general destruction of the last 5,000 years, the last 200 in particular, has broken thousands of these evolutionary links in record time. We are witnessing the beginning of a chain reaction that threatens a final breakdown. No one has any idea how to stop it. The atmospheric pollution created by carbon dioxide and other gases will take hundreds, even thousands of years to clean up. We are probably not yet fully aware of the devastation this has caused the plant and animal world. It is, however, clear that, like the atmosphere, both of these worlds are steadily emitting SOS signals. The pollution of the seas and rivers, as well as desertification, hover at the edge of disaster. Nonetheless, everything suggests that the end of the world will not occur as a result of the disruption of natural balance, but at the hands of some groups organized in networks. Of course, nature will inevitably respond, because it is alive and has an intelligence of its own, and a limit to what it will endure. It will resist when the time and place are right, and when we arrive at that time and place, it will show us no mercy. We will all be held responsible for betraying the skills and values bestowed upon us. Is this not what the end of the world will look like? I don't intend to add anything to the already existing disaster scenarios, but according to our abilities, each of us must do and say what is necessary as responsible members of society. This is our responsibility and our moral and political duty, the very reason for our existence. Throughout human history, much has been said about the fate of Nimrods and pharaohs who withdrew to their castles and pyramids, for obvious reasons. Each of these Nimrods and pharaohs, whether as individuals or as an order, was a monopoly that laid claim to divinity. They were, in fact, the most sublime example of capital monopolies chasing profit during antiquity. Oh, how they resemble the monopolies that have withdrawn to the shopping malls in the cities! There are, of course, differences between them, but their essence remains the same. Despite their magnificence, castles and pyramids cannot compete with the present-day shopping malls, certainly not in numbers. The historical Nimrods and pharaohs don't total more than a few hundred, but the number of contemporary Nimrods and pharaohs is already in the hundreds of thousands. In ancient times, humanity was unable to endure the weight of a few Nimrods and pharaohs, and complained bitterly. How much longer will it be able to endure the hundreds of thousands of them, who have inflicted upon us far-reaching environmental devastation and the disintegration of society? How will it soothe the pain and agony of the war, unemployment, hunger, and poverty they have caused? In the light of evolutionary development, these facts must be emphasized, as they clarify what we mean when we talk about historical society as a totality. Are these facts somehow trivial and insignificant? The science of capitalist modernity, with its positivist structure, was quite self-confident. It assumed major factual discoveries were everything. It regarded absolute truth to be a superficial knowledge of facts. It was sure that we had entered the age of infinite development. How are we to interpret its inability to see the environmental disaster under its nose? How are we to understand the fact that it was unable to address and remedy the social disasters of the last 400 years, which exceed in sum all previous historical disasters, including most notably war? Let's put aside the prevention of war, which is power that has infiltrated into all the nooks and crannies of society. How do we explain the fact that science has been unable to correctly evaluate this as the case? It is clear that science, especially during the era when the dominant monopolies were at the peak of their hegemony, did not, as expected, answer these questions, because it came under the most intense ideological siege and structurally conformed in the way that best served the system. Science, whose structure, goal, and manner are announced and organized to legitimize the system, has proven to be even less effective than religion. However, it is also clear that if science is not ideological, it cannot exist. It is essential that we recognize the knowledge and science that are the ideology of a certain society and class, and hence determine our positions accordingly. If ecology, as one of the newer sciences, positions itself correctly within this framework, it can provide the ideal capacity for resolving not only the environmental problem, but also those of social nature. Social sexism, the family, women, and the population problem. The perception of women as a biologically different sex tops the list of fundamental factors that result in complete blindness to social reality. The existence of different sexes in itself does not cause any social problem, just as the duality in each particle in the universe is not seen as a problem. The duality in human existence should not be treated as a problem. The answer to the question, why is existence dual, can only be philosophical. Ontological analysis may search for a response to this question, not problem. My response is, the existence of a being is impossible in the absence of duality. Duality is what makes existence possible. Even if women and men were not as they are, but were asexual, without a counterpart, they would not have escaped this duality. This is what androgyny must be. We should not be surprised. However, dualities always tend toward different formations, and proof of universal intelligence can also be sought in this tendency to dualism. Neither part of the duality can ever be good or bad. It can only be, and must be, different. If dualities become identical, existence ceases. For example, you also cannot resolve the question of the reproduction of social being with just two women or just two men. Therefore, the question, why women or men, is pointless. Any response would ultimately be philosophical in nature. It is because the universe needs to be, has a tendency to be, has the intellect to be, or desires to be, formed as such. Therefore, it is not only meaningful to examine women as the point of concentration of social relations, it is at the same time very important for addressing and overcoming the entangled social problems. Because the dominant male view has become effectively immune to challenge. Breaking down the blindness about women is like splitting the atom. It requires a great intellectual effort and the smashing of the dominant masculinity. In relation to women, it is necessary to unravel and demolish the socially constructed woman. This construction has been transformed into something almost existential, to an equal degree. The disappointment encountered in the failure to implement the utopia, program, and principles underlies the success and failure of all struggles for freedom and equality, as well as democracy, morals, politics, and class-based struggles. This disappointment carries the traces of the relationship of domination between men and women that has not been destroyed. It is this relationship that lies at the root of all the relations that maintain diverse inequalities, enslavement, despotism, fascism, and militarism. If we want to validate concepts like equality, freedom, democracy, and socialism in a way that won't prove a disappointment, we need to disentangle and tear apart the web of relations around women that are as old as the relationship between society and nature. There is no other road to true freedom, equality in diversity, democracy, and a non-hypocritical morality. Ever since the emergence of hierarchy, sexism has been the ideology of power. It is closely linked to class division and the rise of power. All the archaeological and anthropological evidence, along with current research and observation, indicates that there have been extended periods over a long term when women were the source of authority. This authority was not the authority of power based on surplus product. On the contrary, it stemmed from productivity and fertility, and was a form of authority that served to strengthen social existence. Emotional intelligence, which has more influence on women, has strong ties to this existence. That women are not distinct participants in power struggles based on surplus product is related to their emotional intelligence and the nature of their social existence. Historical findings and current observations clearly show the leading male role in the development of power linked to the hierarchical state order. For this, it was necessary to overcome and smash women's authority, which was substantial until the final stage of Neolithic society. Again, historical findings and current observations verify that major struggles, differing in length and form, were waged to achieve this. Sumerian mythology in particular is quite illuminating in this regard, almost acting as the memory of historical and social nature. The history of civilization is also the history of women's defeat and disappearance. This history is the history of the consolidation of the male-dominant personality, with its gods and servants, emperor and subjects, economy, science, and arts. The defeat and disappearance of women is a major defeat that indicates the decline of society. Sexist society is the result of this defeat and decline. The sexist male was so willing to construct his social domination over women that he turned all normal contact into a display of domination. Even a biological phenomena like sexual intercourse was turned into a consistent nexus of power relations. Men approach sexual contact with women as if they are scoring a victory. This is so deeply ingrained that it has given rise to numerous euphemisms and insults. I got my end. I finished her off. Her belly should never lack a colt and her back some lashes. If you leave it to your daughter, she will run off with the drummer. Bitch, whore, marry her off immediately. Or, a girl like a boy. This clearly shows how influential the relationship between sexuality and power is in society. Even today, it is a sociological fact that every man has countless rights over women, including the right to kill. These rights are acted on every day. Relationships between men and women are overwhelmingly characterized by harassment and rape. Within this social context, the family is built as man's small state. In the history of civilization, the institution called the family has been continuously refined due to the great force it gives to power and the state apparatuses. To begin with, the family centered around the man gained power and became the stem cell of state society. Second, the family ensured the unlimited and unremunerated labor of women. Third, the family served to raise children, meeting population needs. Fourth, as a model, the family propagates slavery and decay throughout society. This family is, in fact, ideological. It gives form and functionality to dynastic ideology. In the family, every man perceives himself to be the ruler of a khanate. Dynastic ideology accentuates the perception that the family is very important and influential. The more women and children in the family, the greater the security and honor for the man. It is also important to consider the present-day family as an ideological institution. If we were to pull women and the family away from the civilization system, power, and the state, little would be left of the system. The price paid to maintain the civilization system is the aggrieved, impoverished, decayed, and defeated existence of women in a constant state of low-intensity warfare. A second parallel chain of monopoly, similar to the monopolies of capital maintained over society throughout the history of civilization, has been the male monopoly over women's world, the oldest and most powerful monopoly. Interpreting women's existence as the oldest colonial realm will allow for more realistic conclusions. It is more correct to call women the oldest colonized people who are not a millet. Capitalist modernity, despite all of its liberal adornments, has not shattered the inherited status and made women free and equal. On the contrary, it has made their situation worse by loading them down with additional responsibilities. The cheapest worker, the house worker, the unpaid worker, the flexible worker, the maid, and jobs of similar status indicate the increasing harshness of her situation. On top of that, her role as the most important magazine staple and the major tool of advertising makes her exploitation even more profound. Even her body, a tool for a wide range of exploitation, is rendered a commodity that capital has no intention of giving up. She is the constant provocative tool of advertising. In short, she is the most productive representative of the modern slave. She is both a tool for unlimited pleasure and the most profitable slave. Is it possible to imagine a more precious commodity? The population problem is closely linked to sexism, the family, and women. The larger the population, the greater the capital. Housewifery is the population factory, making it the factory that produces the most precious of commodities, the offspring that the system needs. Unfortunately, this is what the family has become under the monopolistic domination. While women are made to pay the bill for all the hardships, the value of this commodity is a most precious gift for the system. Population growth is most destructive to women, just as the case under dynastic ideology. Familism, as the key ideology of modernity, is the final dynastic stage. All these issues have been increasingly integrated into nation-state ideology. What could be more precious than continuously raising children for the nation-state? The larger the population of the nation-state, the more powerful that state is. This means that underlying the population explosion are the critical interests of firmly organized capital and male monopolies. Hardship, grief, sorrow, accusations, poverty, and hunger are a woman's lot, while all of the joy and profit go to her man and the capitalists. No other era in history demonstrated such power or developed the practice of using women as such a multi-directional tool of exploitation. Women, as the first and last colony, are passing through the most critical moment in their history. Whereas a joint undertaking of a life reorganized with women, based on a deep-rooted philosophy of freedom, equality, and democracy, could allow us to attain the most perfect level of beauty, goodness, and righteousness. I personally find living with a woman under the current circumstances not only very problematic, but even ugly, negative, and wrong. I never had the courage to live with a woman under the current conditions. In my life, I tried to question even such a powerful urge as the sex drive. The sex drive exists to sustain life. It is a natural wonder and should be treated as sacred. But capital and the male monopoly have contaminated women so completely that this capacity, like a natural wonder, has been transformed into an institution that is more like a seed factory, the most debased institution producing commodities. With these commodities, society is being ransacked and the environment is gradually collapsing under the weight of the population. It's currently 7.5 billion. Let's consider what will happen to the environment with a population of 10 or 15 billion. No doubt, being with a woman and having a child is a very sacred experience. It is an indication that life will not come to an end. It makes eternity tangible. Is there a more precious feeling? All species experience the excitement of being embraced by eternity under these circumstances. For the present-day human being in particular, this situation could not be better summed up than by a wandering minstrel singing, "Our seed has become troublesome to us." Once again, it is undeniable that we face the far-reaching immorality, ugliness, and fundamental wrongness of the capital and male monopoly that contradicts both first and second nature. Anything built by the human hand can be demolished by the human hand. What we are experiencing is neither a law of nature nor our destiny. These are the modifications made by the monopolies. the hands of the cancerous and hormone-injecting life of the crafty and the strong man, that is, the network. I always felt the need for women and men, the most wonderful pair in the universe as far as we know, to achieve a profound understanding. I had the courage to prioritize my relationship with women in this manner, because it is important that above all, we can think together, discuss where, when, and how much distortion has occurred, and overcome it. One of the cornerstones of my philosophical pursuit is undoubtedly women, who think deeply and who can make good, beautiful, and right decisions, thereby winning my admiration as they surpass me, and as people I can relate to. I always believed that the secrets of the flow of life in the universe would be more meaningful, good, beautiful, and true with such a woman. But I was different from other men in embracing a morality that led me to reject a life under the sway of the commodity of capital and the male. In this case, perhaps genealogy, where gene is the woman, and genealogy the science of women, which goes beyond feminism, is a concept that might serve our purpose.